The mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the strained faces of the Advanced Technology Group's leadership. It was a lie, that reflection. It suggested symmetry, a balanced discussion. The reality was a firing squad, and Dr. Marcus Thorne was the only one without a blindfold. Arthur Pendleton, Senior Vice President of Global AI Initiatives, leaned forward, his Savile Row suit uncreased, his silver hair immaculate, his condescension a palpable force in the climate-controlled air of the 47th floor boardroom. He held up Marcus's meticulously prepared proposal, a 30-page document detailing a new logistical routing algorithm, as if it were a piece of soiled tissue. "Marcus," Arthur began, his voice a low, theatrical purr that he mistook for gravitas. "While I appreciate the academic enthusiasm, this is Ether Dynamics. We deal in scalable, enterprise-grade solutions, not PhD theses." A few of Arthur's sycophants, men whose primary technical skill was nodding at the correct moments, chuckled softly. Marcus remained impassive, his posture perfect, his gaze steady. He had anticipated this. "With respect, Arthur," Marcus's voice was calm, a deep baritone that carried easily. "The benchmarks in Appendix C show a 22% efficiency gain over our current system. That translates to a projected cost savings of £80 million in the first year alone." Arthur waved a dismissive hand, the large signet ring on his pinky finger catching the recessed lighting. "Numbers on a page? Theoretical. You lack the real-world operational perspective to grasp the complexities." He dropped the proposal onto the table with a soft thud. "We'll be proceeding with the framework suggested by Peterson's team." Peterson, a man a decade Marcus's junior with half his qualifications, but the correct complexion and alma mater, offered a tight, triumphant smile from across the table. It was the third time in 6 months a major innovation from Marcus had been publicly neutered and handed in a cannibalized form to a less talented white colleague. But little did Arthur Pendleton know, as he basked in the comfortable familiarity of his own prejudice, that he wasn't just dismissing a proposal. He was loading a gun, cocking the hammer, and pressing the barrel firmly against his own temple. For in the quiet hours of the night, in a modest home office, far from this corporate Olympus, Marcus Thorne wasn't just an undervalued architect. He was building a kingdom, and the patent for its cornerstone, an AI so revolutionary it would make Ether's entire portfolio look like a collection of children's toys, had just received its final stamp of approval. The war had been going on for a year, but Arthur Pendleton had just fired the first shot that truly mattered. Marcus's journey to the 47th floor of Ether Tower had begun decades earlier, in a small, book-filled apartment in South London, a world away from the gleaming steel and glass of the city. He was the son of Joseph and Adina Thorne, who had arrived from Accra in the late 1970s with 2 suitcases, a shared dream, and degrees in literature and history that were deemed all but worthless by the British establishment. Joseph worked as a night security guard and later a postman, his quiet dignity a shield against the casual condescension he faced daily. Adina cleaned offices, her hands, which once turned the delicate pages of Achebe and Soyinka, now scrubbing floors and emptying wastebaskets. They poured every ounce of their ambition, every deferred dream, into their son. "Your mind, Marcus," his father would tell him, tapping his own temple, "is the one thing they can never take from you. It is your land, your estate. Cultivate it." And so he did. While other boys were kicking a football in the park, Marcus was devouring books on mathematics and physics, his mind finding a serene beauty in the elegant logic of proofs and theorems. He taught himself to code on a clunky second-hand computer his father had bought for him, the whirring of its hard drive, the soundtrack to his adolescence. The world of algorithms and data structures was a perfect meritocracy. The code either worked or it didn't. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for the subtle biases that colored the world outside his room. His intellect was a rocket, propelling him from his state comprehensive to a scholarship at Imperial College London, and then to the hallowed halls of MIT for his doctorate. He was a phenomenon, a quiet, intensely focused young man who saw patterns others missed, who could coax elegant solutions from intractable problems. His dissertation on heuristic search algorithms in neural networks was hailed as a seminal work. Silicon Valley came calling, and he spent a glorious, sun-drenched decade on the West Coast, first at Google's enigmatic X division, and then as a rising star at OpenAI. He was respected, celebrated, and compensated handsomely. But London called him home. His parents were aging, and his younger sister, Ilara, was in medical school, a dream he was quietly helping to finance. He wanted to be present, to be the pillar his parents had been for him. That was when the offer from Ether Dynamics arrived. It was one of the world's largest tech conglomerates, a behemoth in cloud computing and enterprise software, now desperately trying to pivot into the AI space. The role of lead AI architect in the Advanced Technology Group was a chance to work at an immense scale, to shape the technological future of a global giant. On paper, it was the perfect next step. He met Arthur Pendleton during the final round of interviews. Arthur had been all charm and polish, speaking in grand, sweeping terms about synergy and disruption and paradigm shifts. He had name-dropped CEOs and quoted market analysts, but Marcus noted that he never once delved into the technical specifics. He was a salesman, a politician, a manager of appearances. Marcus had felt a faint flicker of unease, a sense of a man playing a role he didn't fully understand, but he'd dismissed it. A company of Ether's size was bound to have executives like that. It was the price of admission to the big leagues. He accepted the offer. The first few months were a subtle education in the unspoken rules of Ether's corporate culture. It wasn't about the best idea. It was about whose idea it was. It wasn't about data-driven proof. It was about who presented the data. Arthur ran the AI division like a feudal lord, with a court of favored vassals and a clear, though unstated, hierarchy. Marcus, with his quiet intensity and his refusal to engage in the obsequious flattery Arthur craved, was immediately marked as an outsider. The microaggressions began as small, almost deniable slights. In a meeting about a new machine learning model, Marcus would offer a critical insight, only to have Arthur interrupt him mid-sentence to ask a trivial question of a white colleague. "Good point, James," Arthur would boom, after James had simply paraphrased Marcus's original and now forgotten contribution. Or they would be brainstorming on a whiteboard, and Arthur would consistently stand in Marcus's line of sight, physically blocking him from the collaborative process. He was excluded from informal coffee runs and after-work drinks where real decisions were often made. When he asked about it, he was met with feigned ignorance. "Oh, was that today? It was a last-minute thing, Marcus. You weren't at your desk." Marcus was not naive. He had navigated the predominantly white, male spaces of elite academia and tech for his entire adult life. He knew the playbook. He started a document on his personal laptop, a simple password-protected file titled Chronos. In it, he began to log every incident, no matter how small. Date, time, location, individuals present, a verbatim account of what was said, and a brief analysis of the impact. It was methodical, dispassionate, the work of a scientist observing a phenomenon. He felt no anger in those moments, only a cold, clear sense of purpose. He was gathering data. The project that truly exposed the rot at the core of Arthur's leadership was codenamed Project Chimera. It was Arthur's baby, a monstrously ambitious and poorly conceived platform, intended to be Ether's flagship AI product, a one-size-fits-all solution for their enterprise clients. Arthur had sold it to the board with his usual blend of bombast and buzzwords, promising it would revolutionize everything from supply chain management to customer relations. He had secured a budget that ran into the hundreds of millions. The problem was, Chimera was a technical Frankenstein's monster. It was built on an outdated architecture, stitched together from disparate, incompatible systems. The development teams were siloed and demoralized, working incredible hours to patch a sinking ship. The project was a year behind schedule and astronomically over budget. Whispers of its failure were beginning to circulate in the lower echelons of the department, but no one dared voice them to Arthur. His ego was inextricably linked to Chimera's success. To criticize the project was to criticize him, an act of career suicide. Marcus, from his vantage point, could see the iceberg long before the ship was close to hitting it. He had, on 3 separate occasions, submitted detailed memos to Arthur outlining specific critical flaws in Chimera's data processing pipeline and suggesting more efficient modern alternatives. The first memo went unanswered. The second received a 1-line reply. Noted. The third was met with a summons to Arthur's office. The office was an exercise in corporate power projection. It was vast, occupying a corner of the 47th floor with panoramic views of the London skyline. A massive oak desk, conspicuously empty of actual work, dominated the space. The walls were adorned with framed photos of Arthur shaking hands with politicians and grinning on a yacht. "Marcus," Arthur had said, not inviting him to sit, "I need you to be a team player. Your constant critiques of Chimera are becoming unhelpful. They create a negative atmosphere. I need you to focus on your own designated projects." "My designated project," Marcus replied, his voice even, "is to architect the most effective AI solutions for this company. Chimera is not that. It's fundamentally flawed." Arthur's smile was thin, reptilian. "Your job, Marcus, is to do what I tell you to do. Is that understood?" Marcus simply nodded, turned, and walked out. He went back to his desk and logged the conversation in Chronos. The dataset was growing, but he had no idea what was coming next. How a failing project would become the catalyst for his own professional crucifixion. The escalation happened with the precision of a controlled demolition. After the dismissal of his logistics routing proposal, Marcus found his own projects being systematically starved of resources. A request for additional cloud computing credits for his team's experimental work, a routine approval that should have taken hours, was bogged down in a bureaucratic mire for weeks. He traced the delay back to a single email from Arthur's chief lieutenant, a man named Gerald, instructing the finance department to conduct a full cost-benefit analysis before allocating further resources to non-core initiatives. Marcus's projects, despite their proven potential, had been reclassified as non-core. Meanwhile, Project Chimera, The black hole consuming the department's budget had its funding increased. His team, a small group of brilliant but junior engineers who looked up to him, began to feel the chill. Their access to certain development servers was intermittently revoked, citing security updates that never seemed to affect anyone else. Travel requests for conferences where they were scheduled to present their work were denied at the last minute. Marcus did his best to shield them, to keep their morale up, but the message was clear. Working for Marcus Thorne was a career-limiting move in Arthur Pendleton's division. Then came the incident of the Kaito Bank presentation. Kaito Bank was one of Ether's largest clients, a Japanese financial giant looking to overhaul its fraud detection systems. Marcus, leveraging his background in financial tech, had single-handedly developed a novel predictive model that was light years ahead of anything the competition could offer. It was elegant, powerful, and precisely what Kaito Bank needed. He spent 2 months on it, working late nights and weekends, perfecting every line of code, every data visualization. He presented the finished product to Arthur in a one-on-one meeting. Arthur had watched, his face an unreadable mask, as Marcus walked him through the system's capabilities. "Impressive work, Marcus," he'd said at the end. "Very thorough. Leave the deck with me. I'll handle the presentation to the Kaito executives myself. It needs to be delivered with the right strategic messaging." Marcus felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "I'd be happy to co-present," he offered. "I can handle the technical deep dive." No, Arthur said smoothly. "It's better to have a single, unified voice. You understand?" Marcus understood perfectly. 2 weeks later, the email landed in every ATG employee's inbox. It was from the Corporate Communications Department. The subject line read, "A landmark partnership with Kaito Bank." The body of the email lauded the visionary leadership of Arthur Pendleton in securing a 9-figure deal. Attached was a summary of the solution sold to Kaito. It was Marcus's work, verbatim, with Arthur Pendleton's name on the title slide. Marcus stared at the screen, the ambient noise of the open-plan office fading to a dull roar in his ears. He looked across the floor and saw Arthur holding court by the coffee machine, accepting congratulations from his coterie of yes-men. Arthur caught his eye and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of magnanimous acknowledgement from a king to a stable boy. It was a brazen, public act of intellectual theft. He meticulously saved the email, the presentation deck, and his original file with its creation date stamp to a secure cloud drive, and added a detailed entry to Chronos. He noted the date, the time, the names of everyone who had congratulated Arthur. Each piece of data was a brick. He was building a fortress or a prison. He wasn't yet sure which. While Arthur was busy stealing his work, Marcus was cultivating his own. His secret project, the one he worked on in the sanctuary of his home, was his true passion. He called it Nexus Gen. It wasn't just an improvement on existing AI, it was a fundamental paradigm shift. Current generative AI models were brute force instruments. They required colossal data centers, consumed obscene amounts of energy, and were notoriously difficult to control, often producing biased or nonsensical outputs. They were powerful, but clumsy. Nexus Gen was different. It was an entirely new architecture, inspired by the synaptic efficiency of the human brain. It was context-aware, ethically constrained by its very design, and computationally lean. It could run on a fraction of the hardware, learn exponentially faster, and its reasoning was transparent and auditable. It was the solution to the biggest problems plaguing the AI industry: cost, bias, and the black box problem. For 3 years, he had poured his soul into it. It was his masterpiece. He had filed for a provisional patent a year ago, a complex and expensive process he'd funded himself. The news that the patent was in its final review stage had arrived just a week before the Kaito Bank incident. NexusGen was his ace in the hole, a card he prayed he would never have to play. He wanted to succeed on his own merits within the system. But the system, he was beginning to realize, was designed to prevent men like him from doing just that. He also had another, more subtle advantage. During his time at MIT, he had been a teaching assistant for a visiting professor, a brilliant, formidable woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was a pioneer in computational ethics, one of the few people who had foreseen the societal dangers of unregulated AI long before it became a mainstream concern. They had formed a bond, a meeting of minds that transcended the typical student-professor relationship. They had stayed in touch over the years, occasionally exchanging emails about new research papers or industry trends. A year ago, to Marcus's surprise, he had seen a press release announcing that Dr. Evelyn Reed had been appointed as an independent director to the board of Ether Dynamics. She was there to chair their new AI Ethics and Oversight Committee. He had sent her a congratulatory note, and she had replied warmly, suggesting they have a coffee to catch up. They met at a quiet cafe near St. Paul's. She was as sharp and incisive as he remembered, her eyes missing nothing. He told her about his work, his ambitions at Ether. He didn't mention Arthur or the difficulties he was facing. It would have been unprofessional. But he sensed she understood the landscape. "It's a company in transition, Marcus," she had said, stirring her tea. "A lot of legacy thinking at the top. Be careful. True talent can be seen as a threat by those who feel their own relevance fading." It was a piece of advice that had stuck with him. They had agreed to keep an open, informal line of communication. He hadn't used it yet. It was another ace, one to be kept hidden until the stakes were impossibly high. The pressure on Project Chimera was intensifying. The board was getting restless, demanding to see a return on their massive investment. Key clients who had been promised early access were threatening to pull their contracts. The dam of Arthur's carefully constructed reality was beginning to crack. In a desperate attempt to show progress, he scheduled a make-or-break live demonstration of the platform for the entire executive leadership team of ATG. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The demo was a disaster. The system was slow, buggy, and at one point, in response to a simple query about quarterly sales projections, it generated a paragraph of incomprehensible text about 19th century naval battles. The silence in the room was deafening. Arthur's face was ashen. He tried to laugh it off, blaming a server glitch, but the damage was done. The project wasn't just delayed, it was a joke. Panic set in. Arthur needed a scapegoat, but he also needed a savior. In a move of breathtaking hypocrisy, he summoned Marcus to his office the next morning. "Marcus," he said, his voice strained, the usual arrogant swagger gone. "We have a crisis with Chimera. The core processing unit is underperforming. I need your eyes on it. I need you to fix it." The irony was so thick, Marcus could taste it. He was being asked to save the very project he had been punished for criticizing. He could have refused. He could have watched Arthur drown in the mess of his own making. But that wasn't his way. His professional pride, his ingrained instinct to solve the puzzle, took over. And more importantly, this was an opportunity. An opportunity to get under the hood of Arthur's greatest failure, to see all its secrets, to understand its every weakness. I'll need full, unrestricted root access to all Chimera servers and development logs, Marcus said, his tone businesslike. And I'll need my team's resources fully reinstated, effective immediately. Arthur, cornered and desperate, could only nod. Whatever you need, just get it done. Marcus walked out of the office, not with a sense of triumph, but with the cold resolve of a surgeon about to perform a difficult and necessary amputation. He was going into the belly of the beast, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the beast would try to devour him before he was done. For the next 2 weeks, Marcus and his small, revitalized team worked around the clock. They lived on caffeine and takeout, their corner of the office a hive of activity, a stark contrast to the rest of the floor where the demoralized Chimera teams were treading water. Marcus was in his element. He dove into the millions of lines of convoluted code, the labyrinthine server architecture, the messy, unstructured data lakes that fed the system. It was worse than he had imagined. Chimera wasn't just flawed. It was terminally ill. The core architecture was a relic, incapable of handling the scale of the tasks it was being given. The data pipelines were leaky, corrupting information at every stage. The machine learning models were poorly trained and riddled with hidden biases. It was a monument to Arthur Pendleton's technical ignorance and managerial incompetence. Marcus documented every single flaw, not with malice, but with the dispassionate precision of a coroner. He traced the origins of the bad decisions, cross-referencing development logs with project management emails. A clear pattern emerged. Every time a talented engineer had raised a red flag about the architecture, they had been overruled by Arthur or one of his lieutenants, who had prioritized speed and flashy-looking demos over sound engineering principles. After 2 weeks of relentless forensic analysis, Marcus had his diagnosis. And he had a solution. It was radical. It involved scrapping almost a third of Chimera's existing code and replacing it with a lean, modular framework based on the principles he had perfected in Nexus Gen. He wouldn't use Nexus Gen itself. That was his own intellectual property. But he could apply its philosophy. It would be a massive undertaking. A painful course of chemotherapy, but it was the only way to save the patient. He prepared a new presentation. It was dense, technical, and brutally honest. It was a masterclass in data-driven analysis, with clear charts showing the system's failures, precise excerpts of flawed code, and a detailed, step-by-step roadmap for his proposed solution. He didn't editorialize. He didn't assign blame. The data spoke for itself. He requested a meeting with Arthur and his senior leadership team to present his findings. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning in the main boardroom. Marcus knew this would be the moment of truth. He would be presenting the unvarnished, ugly reality of Arthur's failure directly to his face, in front of his most loyal followers. It was a necessary confrontation, but a dangerous one. He spent the night before going over his presentation, ensuring every claim was backed by irrefutable evidence. He also made a small, practical preparation. He purchased a new digital voice recorder, a tiny, discreet device, and tested it to ensure its microphone was sensitive enough to pick up clear audio from his jacket pocket. He hoped he wouldn't need it. But data had taught him to always prepare, for the worst-case scenario. The atmosphere in the boardroom was thick with tension. Arthur sat at the head of the table, flanked by Gerald and Peterson and 3 other VPs who owed their careers to him. They looked like a panel of judges at a show trial. Marcus stood at the podium, the cool, detached professional. He began his presentation, his voice calm and steady. He walked them through the catastrophic state of Project Chimera, slide by slide. He showed them the exponential growth in server costs, the plummeting accuracy of the predictive models, the cascading system failures. With each slide, the mood in the room grew darker. The VPs shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. Arthur's face, which had started with a look of bored tolerance, was slowly hardening into a mask of cold fury. Marcus was not just critiquing a project. He was systematically dismantling the central pillar of Arthur Pendleton's career and reputation. He was exposing him as a fraud in front of his own court. When Marcus got to the final section, his proposed solution, he laid out the plan. "We need to halt all current development," he stated, "and begin a 3-month surgical refactoring of the core architecture. It will be painful, and it will mean admitting to the board that the initial strategy was flawed, but it is the only way to deliver a viable product." He clicked to his final slide, which summarized the risks of inaction versus the benefits of his proposed course. He had done it. He had presented the unvarnished truth, backed by a mountain of evidence. He had done his job. He looked at Arthur, waiting for a response. The silence stretched for a long, agonizing moment. Arthur Pendleton slowly pushed his chair back. He stood up, his 6'2" frame seeming to fill the room. He walked slowly around the table until he was standing directly in front of Marcus. He was so close Marcus could smell the faint, cloying scent of his expensive cologne. Arthur leaned in, his face inches from Marcus's, his voice a low, venomous hiss that was meant for Marcus alone, but was audible to everyone at the table. "You think you can come in here," he seethed, "a junior architect, and tell me how to run my division? You think your little spreadsheets mean anything?" Marcus stood his ground, his expression unreadable. "The data is clear, Arthur." Arthur's face contorted into an ugly sneer, the polished veneer cracking to reveal the raw prejudice beneath. "Your brain is primitive, boy," he spat, the word boy dripping with a generations-old poison. "You can crunch numbers, I'll give you that. But you lack the strategic vision, the cultural intuition for true innovation. You're a coder, a mechanic. You'll never be a creator. Stick to what you know. Stick to coding." The words hung in the air, a stunning, obscene violation of every corporate code of conduct, every veneer of civility. The other VPs stared down at the table, their faces frozen, their silence a form of complicity. No one spoke. No one met Marcus's eyes. In that moment of profound, ugly racism, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him. He didn't flinch, he didn't raise his voice. He simply held Arthur's gaze. Inside his jacket pocket, a tiny red light on the digital recorder blinked steadily, capturing every syllable, every drop of venom. The data set was now complete. Arthur, blinded by his own rage and arrogance, had just handed him the weapon that would bring his entire world crashing down. The aftermath of the meeting was swift and brutal. Arthur, having crossed a line from which there was no return, moved to neutralize the threat Marcus represented. Within an hour, an email from HR landed in Marcus's inbox, summoning him to a meeting the following day. The subject was Review of Professional Conduct. It was a classic corporate ambush. Arthur was moving to paint Marcus as the aggressor, the insubordinate employee, the one who was not a team player. He would use the VPs from the meeting as his witnesses, men who would twist the narrative to protect their patron. That same afternoon, Marcus's access to the Chimera project servers was revoked. An automated email informed him that he had been reassigned, effective immediately. His new project was a low-priority, dead-end initiative, overseeing the data migration for a legacy system that was being decommissioned. It was the corporate equivalent of being sent to Siberia. He was being sidelined, buried, made irrelevant. Arthur's message was unambiguous. I can destroy you. Marcus went home that evening, not in a state of despair, but of intense, focused energy. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. He opened his laptop and began the final phase of his work. He took the audio file from the voice recorder and used a software to create a clean, time-stamped transcript. The words, "Your brain is primitive, boy," stood out on the page in stark, damning clarity. He opened the Chronos file, his log of every microaggression, every act of sabotage, every stolen idea from the past year. It was now over 50 pages long, a meticulous, undeniable record of systemic discrimination. He began to weave it all together into a single, comprehensive dossier. He created a timeline, linking each of Arthur's actions to specific projects and business outcomes. He showed how his logistics proposal, if implemented, would have already saved the company millions. He demonstrated how Arthur's theft of his Kaito bank work was not just plagiarism, but a gross misrepresentation to a key client. He embedded the audio file of the boardroom outburst. He attached the email chains, the project plans, the server logs. He built his case brick by brick, not with emotion or accusation, but with cold, hard, irrefutable evidence. It was the most important piece of work he had ever done. As he worked late into the night, the full weight of his situation settled upon him. He thought of his parents, of the sacrifices they had made, of the quiet dignity with which they had faced a world that constantly underestimated them. He thought of his sister Elara and her dream of becoming a surgeon, a dream he had sworn to support. This wasn't just about his career anymore. It was about his family's legacy. About every person of color who had ever been told they weren't good enough, who had their contributions erased, who had been forced to swallow the bitter pill of prejudice in a place that claimed to be a meritocracy. He was fighting for all of them now. His resolve hardened into steel. He would not be a victim. He would be the architect of his own justice. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, the dossier was complete. A perfect, unassailable case. But he knew he couldn't take it to Ether's Human Resources Department. HR, in a company like this, was designed to protect the company from liability. Not to protect employees from powerful executives. They would bury it, delay it, sanitize it. They would offer him a settlement and an NDA, pushing him out quietly while Arthur received a slap on the wrist. No, he had to go over their heads. He had to go straight to the top. He opened his email client and composed a new message. The recipient was Dr. Evelyn Reed. The subject line was brief and urgent. Confidential board matter. Request for an urgent meeting. In the body of the email, he wrote only 3 sentences. Dear Evelyn, I hope this message finds you well. An urgent and sensitive situation has developed here at Ether that requires board-level attention. I have compiled a dossier of evidence I believe you, in your capacity as chair of the Ethics and Oversight Committee, must see. Are you available for a private meeting at your earliest possible convenience?" He attached nothing. He hinted at nothing more. He hit send. The first move in the endgame had been made. Now all he could do was wait. He had no idea that the company's own crisis was about to intersect with his own, creating a perfect storm that would change everything in the next 72 hours. The reply came less than an hour later. At 3:47 a.m., it was a testament to Evelyn Reed's own work ethic and her recognition of the gravity in Marcus's carefully chosen words. "Marcus, I'm available. My office, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Come to the side entrance. I'll have my assistant meet you. Discretion is assured." Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. The clock was now ticking. He spent the next few hours preparing. He printed 2 copies of the complete dossier, placing them in sealed manila envelopes. He uploaded an encrypted copy to a secure cloud server and sent the access key to his personal email, an insurance policy. He also prepared a second, even more critical presentation. This one wasn't about Arthur's failings. It was about Ether's future. It was the full business and technical unveiling of Nexus Gen AI. He included the patent registration number, the performance benchmarks that dwarfed anything else on the market, a detailed integration roadmap, and a 5-year revenue projection that ran into the billions. He was not going into this meeting as a victim seeking redress. He was going in as a visionary, offering a lifeline. While Marcus prepared for his meeting, a different kind of crisis was unfolding within Ether Dynamics. The catastrophic demo of Project Chimera had not gone unnoticed. An executive in attendance, worried about his own stock options, had leaked the details to a journalist at a major financial newspaper. The story broke just as the London markets opened. Ether Dynamics' flagship AI project in disarray, sources say. The article was brutal, detailing the budget overruns, the missed deadlines, and the technical failures. Ether's stock price, which had been trading at a record high, began to plummet. By 7:30 a.m., it was down 8%. The board was in a panic. The CEO, a man named Charles Kensington, was in full damage control mode, but the narrative was spinning out of his grasp. The company looked incompetent, a lumbering giant unable to compete in the fast-moving world of AI. They were vulnerable, and the sharks, the activist investors, the corporate raiders, were beginning to circle. Marcus arrived at the discreet side entrance of the building at 7:55 a.m., completely unaware of the market chaos. He was met by a young woman who introduced herself as Evelyn's executive assistant. She led him not up to the corporate floors, but down to a sub-level where the board members had a suite of private, soundproofed meeting rooms, far from the prying eyes and ears of the main offices. Evelyn Reed was waiting for him. She was dressed in a simple but elegant dark suit, her gray hair cut in a sharp, no-nonsense style. She wasted no time on pleasantries. "Marcus," she said, her expression serious, "your timing is either impeccable or catastrophic. The company is having a very bad morning. What is this about?" Marcus handed her one of the manila envelopes. "It's about why the company is having a very bad morning," he said. "And it's about a pattern of behavior that has allowed this to happen." For the next hour, Evelyn Reed sat in complete silence as she read. She turned every page of the dossier, her expression growing more and more grim. She read the emails, studied the timeline, and paused for a long time on the transcript of the boardroom meeting. When she was finished, she looked up at Marcus, her eyes blazing with a cold, controlled anger. "He said this to you? Your brain is primitive, boy?" "He did," Marcus confirmed. I have the audio. I have no doubt that you do, she said, her voice tight. This is beyond the pale. This isn't just a violation of company policy, Marcus. This is a sickness. And it explains everything. The arrogance, the incompetence, the willingness to surround himself with sycophants instead of talent. He let Chimera fail because his ego couldn't handle being challenged by someone like you. She took a deep breath, composing herself. HR would have buried this. You were right to bring it to me. I will take this to the CEO and the board. Arthur Pendleton's career at Ether Dynamics is over. I will personally see to it. Marcus held up his hand. Evelyn, I appreciate that, and justice for what he did is important. But I didn't come here just for that. Firing Arthur doesn't solve the company's real problem. Which is? She asked, leaning forward. Which is that Project Chimera is a symptom of a deeper disease, Marcus explained. Ether has a culture that stifles genuine innovation. It rewards political maneuvering over technical excellence. Firing Arthur is cutting out a tumor, but the company still has cancer. And right now, it's bleeding out on the stock market. It needs more than surgery. It needs a miracle cure. He slid the second presentation, the one about Nexus Gen, across the table. This, he said, is the cure. For the second time that morning, Evelyn was rendered speechless. Marcus walked her through the Nexus Gen architecture, his voice filled with the quiet passion of a true creator. He explained its efficiency, its ethical framework, its vast potential. He showed her the approved patent, his name listed as the sole inventor. He laid out the business case, showing how Nexus Gen could not only replace the failed Chimera project, but could be integrated across Ether's entire cloud services division, creating an insurmountable competitive advantage. By the time he was finished, Evelyn was looking at him with a mixture of awe and astonishment. You built this? By yourself? In your spare time? I did, Marcus said. Because I had to. The work I was allowed to do at Ether wasn't enough. Evelyn stood up and began to pace the small room, her mind working furiously. The pieces were all clicking into place. The crisis with the stock price, the irrefutable evidence of Arthur's malfeasance, and now this technological silver bullet. It wasn't just a series of problems. It was a singular opportunity. A chance to reset the entire leadership and strategy of the AI division in one clean, decisive move. Charles Kensington, our CEO, has called an emergency board meeting for 2 p.m. this afternoon to address the stock crisis, she said, her voice now sharp with purpose. He thinks it's going to be a meeting about damage control. He's wrong. It's going to be a meeting about the future of this company. She looked directly at Marcus. You need to be there. And you need to be ready to present this. Both parts. First, the evidence against Arthur, then the case for Nexus Gen. Can you do that? Marcus took a deep breath. This was it, the culmination of everything. The boardroom, the place of his humiliation, was about to become his stage. Yes, he said, his voice unwavering. I can. The hours leading up to the 2 p.m. board meeting were a blur of strategic preparation. Evelyn worked the phones, her calls brief and precise. She spoke to the company's general counsel, ensuring she understood the exact legal procedures for removing a senior executive for cause. She spoke to the chief financial officer, a pragmatic, numbers-driven woman named Eleanor Vance, priming her with the news that she had discovered not only the root cause of the Chimera disaster, but also a potential solution of immense financial value. She didn't reveal the details, only that the meeting was unmissable. She was setting the stage, creating an atmosphere of anticipation and urgency. Meanwhile, Marcus returned home to refine his presentation. He stripped it of all emotion, all personal grievance. It was now two distinct but linked arguments. Part 1, Project Chimera, a post-mortem and root cause analysis, was a devastatingly clinical takedown of Arthur Pendleton's leadership, using his own emails and project data as evidence. Part 2, NexusGen, a new trajectory for AI at Ether, was the forward-looking vision, the lifeboat for the sinking ship. At 1:45 p.m., Marcus met Evelyn in the private anteroom to the main boardroom on the 50th floor, the executive level. The air up here was different, rarefied. The carpets were thicker, the art on the walls was original, and the silence was heavy with the weight of immense capital. "Are you ready?" Evelyn asked him. "I am," Marcus said. He felt a profound sense of calm. He had the data, he had the truth, and he had the solution. The outcome was no longer in his hands. It was a matter of pure logic, and he trusted logic more than anything. "One more thing," Evelyn said, her eyes serious. "I've arranged a witness, someone who can corroborate the cultural impact of Arthur's behavior. She's waiting in a nearby office. She's very nervous, but she's agreed to speak if called upon." She told him the name. Sarah Jenkins, a junior data scientist from his old team. Marcus was stunned. Sarah was brilliant, but quiet and timid. For her to risk her career like this was an act of incredible bravery. He felt a surge of gratitude. He wasn't entirely alone. The board members filed in. Charles Kensington, the CEO, looked haggard, the strain of the morning's stock collapse etched on his face. Eleanor Vance, the CFO, gave Evelyn a questioning look, her sharp gaze missing nothing. The other 6 directors, mostly older men from banking and industry backgrounds, looked grim. Arthur Pendleton was the last to arrive. He strode in with a false air of confidence, a man determined to project control even as his world was crumbling. He was there to talk about Chimera, to spin a story of unforeseen technical hurdles, and to promise a recovery plan. He saw Marcus sitting quietly in a chair against the wall, next to Evelyn, and a flicker of irritation crossed his face. He likely assumed Marcus was there as a technical aid for Evelyn. He gave Marcus a dismissive nod and took his seat at the table. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. The meeting began with Kensington giving a bleak overview of the market situation. The stock was now down 12%. Their market capitalization had shed over £10 billion in 5 hours. "We need a plan, Arthur," Kensington said, his voice frayed. "The market has lost confidence. What are you going to tell them?" Arthur launched into a prepared speech full of corporate jargon about recalibrating timelines and leveraging core competencies. It was a smokescreen, and everyone knew it. As he spoke, Evelyn calmly placed a folder in front of each board member. Inside was a printed copy of the executive summary of Marcus's dossier. "Charles," Evelyn interrupted, her voice cutting through Arthur's rambling. "I'm afraid Arthur is misdiagnosing the problem. The issue with Project Chimera is not technical. It is, and always has been, a failure of leadership." Arthur stopped mid-sentence, his face flushing with anger. "Evelyn, this is hardly the time or the place." "On the contrary, Arthur," she said, her voice like ice. "This is precisely the time and the place." She gestured to the folders. "Before you is a summary of a year-long pattern of mismanagement, intellectual property theft, and discriminatory conduct by Mr. Pendleton, which has led directly to the crisis we find ourselves in today. The full dossier is even more damning." The board members began to read. A shocked silence fell over the room, broken only by the rustle of paper. Arthur's face went from red to a pasty white. He looked around the table, seeking an ally, but found only stony faces staring down at the pages. "This is absurd," he stammered. "A collection of lies from a disgruntled employee." "Is it, Arthur?" Evelyn said. She took out a small speaker and placed it on the center of the table. "I believe everyone should hear this. It's from your last project review meeting with Dr. Thorne." She pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. Arthur's voice, filled with venom, echoed through the silent, opulent boardroom. "Your brain is primitive, boy. You lack the strategic vision. Stick to coding." The sound of his own undisguised racism, played back in this sterile environment, was shocking. Several board members physically recoiled. Charles Kensington stared at Arthur, his expression a mixture of fury and disgust. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur Pendleton, the master of words and appearances, had nothing to say. He had been utterly, irrevocably exposed. "I believe," Evelyn said into the silence, "that we have clear grounds for immediate termination for cause." Kensington nodded, his face grim. "Arthur, I think you should leave." But Evelyn wasn't finished. She held up a hand. "Before he goes, there's one more thing the board needs to understand. This wasn't just an attack on one man. It was an attack on this company's future. Because the man Arthur Pendleton tried to destroy is the only person who can save us." She turned to Marcus. "Dr. Thorne, if you please." For the first time, all eyes in the room turned to Marcus. He stood up, walked to the head of the table, and plugged his laptop into the main screen. The Ether Dynamics logo was replaced by a single, elegant slide. Nexus Gen AI. For the next 30 minutes, he held the entire board captive. He presented his creation not as a vindictive counterattack, but as a passionate, brilliant solution to their existential crisis. He spoke of computational efficiency, of ethical AI, of new market opportunities. He answered their questions with a depth of knowledge and a strategic vision that made Arthur's earlier presentation sound like the ramblings of a child. He was no longer the victim. He was the most powerful person in the room. When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then the room erupted. Not with anger, but with excitement. Eleanor Vance, the CFO, was the first to speak. "The revenue projections, are they realistic?" "They're conservative," Marcus replied calmly. "They're based only on our existing client base. The potential for new market capture is significantly higher." Another director, a tech veteran from Silicon Valley, spoke up. "The patent is solely in your name? The IP is yours?" "That is correct," Marcus said. "Which means," the director said, looking around the table, "we are not in a position to demand this. We are in a position to ask for it. To partner with Dr. Thorne." The power dynamic in the room had been completely inverted. Marcus Thorne, the man who just 24 hours earlier was being exiled to a corporate wasteland, was now holding the future of a multi-billion-pound company in his hands. Charles Kensington, seeing the consensus in the room, acted decisively. He turned to Arthur, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Arthur, your employment at Ether Dynamics is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You will be hearing from our legal counsel." Arthur stared, his mouth opening and closing. but no words came out. His entire world, built on a foundation of privilege and prejudice, had been obliterated in the space of an hour. As two security guards entered the room to escort him out, his eyes met Marcus's. In them, Marcus saw not hatred, but a dawning, horrified understanding. The mechanic had just revealed himself to be the master architect. He had picked the wrong target. After Arthur was gone, Kensington turned to Marcus. The tone was entirely different. It was respectful, almost deferential. "Dr. Thorne," he began, "on behalf of this board, I want to offer my profound apologies for what you have endured. It is a stain on this company, but I hope we can move forward. What you have with Nexus Gen is revolutionary. We want you to lead our AI division. We want you to build its future here, at Aether." He paused. "What are your terms?" Marcus had anticipated this moment. He knew his value. He did not want revenge. He wanted to build something better. "My terms are simple," he said, his voice steady. "First, a complete overhaul of the ATG's promotion and project review processes to be overseen by an independent committee to ensure a true meritocracy. Second, a significant ring-fenced budget to create a new division, Aether AI Labs, which I will lead as Executive Vice President, reporting directly to you. Third, a substantial equity stake in the company and a licensing agreement for Nexus Gen that reflects its market value." He paused, then added his final, most important term, and fourth, "I want Sarah Jenkins promoted to lead data scientist in the new lab, with a commensurate salary increase. Her integrity should be rewarded, not punished." Kensington didn't even hesitate. He looked around the board. They all nodded. "Done," he said. "Welcome to the executive team, Dr. Thorne." In the space of 3 days, Marcus had gone from a pariah to a prince, not through corporate politicking, but through a relentless application of intellect, integrity, and strategy. The justice was not just a victory, it was a paradigm shift. The news of Arthur Pendleton's sudden departure and Marcus Thorne's meteoric promotion sent a seismic shockwave through Aether dynamics. The official company-wide email, drafted by Kensington himself with input from Evelyn and Marcus, was a masterpiece of corporate communication. It announced the immediate dissolution of the old Global AI Initiatives Group and the formation of the new Aether AI Labs, to be helmed by Dr. Marcus Thorne. It spoke of a new direction and a renewed commitment to innovation, transparency, and a culture of meritocracy. It didn't mention Arthur's crimes, but the subtext was crystal clear to anyone who had worked under him. The old guard was out. The future had arrived. The company's stock, buoyed by a follow-up press release announcing a strategic partnership with leading AI innovator Dr. Marcus Thorne on a revolutionary new platform, rebounded with a vengeance, soaring 20% in the next 48 hours. Marcus's first day as executive vice president was surreal. He moved from his modest cubicle on the 32nd floor to Arthur's former corner office on the 47th. The panoramic view was the same, but the energy was entirely different. The vast oak desk, once a monument to idleness, was now covered in technical schematics and project plans. He held an all-hands meeting with the entire former ATG staff that afternoon. He stood before them, not as a conqueror, but as a fellow engineer. He spoke about his vision for Aether AI Labs, a place where the best ideas would win, regardless of who they came from. He spoke about fostering a culture of psychological safety, where challenging the status quo was encouraged, not punished. He announced Sarah Jenkins's promotion, and the genuine, heartfelt applause that followed was a sign that change was already underway. The demoralized, fearful teams who had been suffocated under Arthur's reign now saw a glimmer of hope. They saw a leader who spoke their language, who understood their work, who had risen from their own ranks. But the most satisfying and most difficult part of his new role was yet to come. Part of the board's decision, insisted upon by Evelyn Reed for its symbolic power, was that Arthur Pendleton was not to be terminated in the traditional sense. A quiet firing with a golden parachute would allow him to save face, to slink off to another board position somewhere else. They wanted to send a message. So he was not fired. He was demoted. Stripped of all executive titles, all reports, all decision-making authority, and all but a fraction of his salary. He was given a new title, Junior Transition Analyst. And his new reporting line was directly to the head of Ether AI Labs, Dr. Marcus Thorne. A week after the board meeting, Marcus's assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Pendleton is here for his 10 a.m. meeting." "Send him in," Marcus said. Arthur walked in. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled, off-the-rack version. The arrogant swagger had been replaced by a stooped, defeated posture. He looked 10 years older. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the vast office, his former kingdom now occupied by the man he had tried to break. He wouldn't make eye contact. "Please, have a seat, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice neutral. He gestured to the simple visitor's chair, not the plush leather ones Arthur had once favored. Arthur sat. The silence was thick. "I've reviewed your new role description," Marcus began, his tone all business. "Your primary task for the next 6 months will be to document the failures of Project Chimera. I want a complete, exhaustive report. Every missed deadline, every budget overrun, every flawed technical decision. I want you to interview every engineer who worked on it and document why their concerns were ignored. The final report should be a case study in mismanagement, a manual for what this company must never do again." Arthur finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "Marcus, Marcus held up a hand, stopping him. "This is not a negotiation, Arthur. This is your assignment. It's important work. It will provide a valuable service to the company." He slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a floor plan. "This will be your new workspace," he said. It was a small, windowless cubicle down on the 28th floor, nestled between the interns and the temporary contractors. The ultimate humiliation. Arthur stared at the paper, his face ashen. He had been a king, and now he was being sent to a dungeon in his own castle. "Do you have any questions about your assignment?" Marcus asked. Arthur shook his head, unable to speak. "Good," Marcus said, standing up, the universal signal that the meeting was over. "Your first draft is due on my desk in 30 days. Arthur stood, turned, and walked out of the office, a ghost haunting his own past. Marcus watched him go, feeling not a sense of vengeful glee, but a profound and solemn sense of closure. Justice had been served. Not hot and angry, but cold, precise, and absolute. In the months that followed, Ether Dynamics was transformed. Under Marcus's leadership, Nexus Gen AI was integrated with breathtaking speed. It revitalized the company's product lines, created new revenue streams, and attracted the best and brightest talent in the AI field, all eager to work at the new, innovative Ether AI Labs. Marcus became a reluctant star, featured in tech journals and business magazines as a visionary leader who was redefining the industry. He used his platform not to celebrate himself, but to advocate for diversity and inclusion in tech, telling a sanitized version of his story as a case study in the power of untapped potential. He established a mentorship program for young Black and minority engineers, creating the pathways that had never existed for him. The culture of Ether began to heal. The old boys club was dismantled, replaced by a vibrant, collaborative environment. The Chronos file remained on Marcus's private drive, a reminder of the battle he had won, but his focus was now entirely on the future. He had cultivated his garden, and now it was flourishing. One evening, months later, he was on a video call with his sister, Ilara. She was beaming, her face glowing with excitement. She had just been accepted into the surgical residency program at Johns Hopkins, her top choice. "I couldn't have done it without you, Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Knowing you had my back, not having to worry about the tuition, it let me just focus on being the best." "You did the work, Ilara," he said, a warm pride swelling in his chest. "You earned this." After the call, he leaned back in his chair in his quiet home office, the place where Nexus Gen was born. He looked out the window at the city lights. He thought of his parents, now comfortably retired, their financial worries erased. He had given them the peace they so richly deserved. He had won more than a corporate battle. He had secured his family's future, honored his parents' sacrifices, and built a legacy of his own. The world had told him to stick to coding, to know his place, but he had rewritten the code, and in doing so had redefined his place in the world, not just as a creator, but as the architect of a new and better reality.